Great. Well, welcome everybody who's in person and all our folks who are online as well. I'm Jared Longmore. I'm the current president of our AFP Genesee Valley chapter, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our first deep dive of the year in person, which is really exciting. So I want to introduce first a friend, an AFP member, past president of AFP Mohawk Valley, Jonathan Mahar Zayas, who's here today to do a member spotlight for us. So he's going to talk a little bit about his fundraising career. He's going to talk about his work with AFP and the mentorship that he does through AFP. And he's going to give some advice to other members looking to join. So Jonathan, it's all yours for a few minutes.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone. So good evening. Why? Don't even know what time it is. Like
Come a little closer, John.
Come a little closer. Okay. Hopefully people will see it as well. My name is Jonathan. I was asked today to share a little bit about my experience with AFP and the mentorship program specifically. So I've been an AFP member for about 10 years now. I want to especially thank this person over here because she was the one who recruited me, who happened to come here as well. I actually started with the Genesee Valley chapter when I was at U of R as an intern. Worked with Melanie on the communications committee and been a member since. So, and now moved to Albany, now back in the area. I'm actually a global member as well. So really excited to continue my effort here and then join the local IDA committee here as well. So it's good to be here. But when I moved back to Rochester, I was like, I got to get connected. I got to get supported. And I attended a program, and Danielle had mentioned the mentorship program as a possibility. So I signed up because they look for mentees, and I've been paired with actually Joel Elliott at the St. Joseph's Neighborhood Center. We've been connected for a little over a year now, which is awesome. It actually helped me get my job too, part of it too, with Lauren and JK Executives. That's a whole like interesting thing that came up as well, like just a small type of, but it's been really great because it's been a sounding board just as coming in as well. Like I think even with my kind of tenure in fundraising, it was just helpful to kind of have someone to bounce ideas from, get back acclimated in the community, navigate this new normal that we do have with COVID and what people are doing and how philanthropy is changing. So it's been a great so far as well. And we've actually had some transitions at my job, which led to a somewhat promotion. So Joel was actually helpful in kind of crafting some of that transition as well. But it's a great opportunity, and if you haven't been a mentor or mentee yourself, I encourage you to look into it and kind of explore that as well. But just wanted to say that. So awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today's deep dive is called Our Campaign Feasibility Study Still Relevant? And I was going to read off Karen's bio, but I think most of us know Karen in the room. But I'll say Karen is truly one of the most intelligent, thoughtful, and productive fundraisers. So she's currently a director of advancement at Allendale Columbia, but Karen has experience at organizations large and small. She's been a manager, she's been a leader, she's been a consultant. So I really can't think of anyone better to give this deep dive today. So Karen, it is all yours.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Jared. And it really is a pleasure to be here. And hello to everyone out in Zoom land. I did just want to start by acknowledging two sources that I use for some of my information today. Westwind Consulting is a consulting firm out of Ithaca, New York. If you're not familiar with them, they do a lot of work here in the Rochester region, as well as regionally and nationally. Wonderful firm. The women that started it came out of Cornell and the Cornell Fund, so I've known them for many, many years. So I did tap them to understand a little bit about how COVID has been affecting feasibility studies in their minds over the last 2 years, as well as, and I know I'm going to butcher the name of Mark's firm, but Empron. Right. There. Talk to Mark as well. Even though I said, oh my gosh, I'm gonna absolutely mess up the name of your firm. Mark and his team were really, really helpful. Also, you probably are familiar, if you're not familiar with the name of the firm, you're probably familiar with some of the people that joined the firm. They're doing work in Rochester, as well as a lot of work in Florida right now and other places. So I did call both of them to make sure I was delivering to all of you some more pertinent information about what they're seeing, not just here in Rochester, but in other places in the last 2 years. So thank you to both of those firms. I wanted to start, I know that we have colleagues in the room and colleagues that are Zooming in that are at, varying levels in their profession. So some may be more familiar than others with feasibility studies. Ask questions, tailor this to what works for you. I'm going to cover a bunch of things, but please feel free to wave your hand or scream or whatever you need to do. If I'm either going too fast or too slow, or you need to learn something else. So I wanted to talk first about not only feasibility studies, but a little later in the talk about assessments. And I don't know how familiar everyone is with development assessments now, but they really, I don't want to say go hand in hand, but I don't really think now you can talk about one without the other. So a feasibility study, and again, most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, but you do a feasibility study when you have an extraordinary financial need for a project or an initiative. And you want to see if that's going to resonate with your constituents. You want to see if you can raise money for that project, and if so, how much. I mean, that's, again, very broad brushstroke, but that's what we think of when we think of feasibility studies. Campaign assessment is very different, and campaign assessments are really internal reviews of your ability as a staff team, as an organization, to even launch into that pre-campaign mode. So it's not really about how to raise the money, it's if you're ready to raise the money. And so we're going to be talking about that tonight too, because as you'll see through the presentation, I think because of some challenges we've seen in COVID, assessments are becoming even more relevant for people. So I'll start by giving some of the information, both personal and what I've gathered with the impacts of COVID. Obviously, it's affected all of us, and it's affected our donors. We've made plans, we've altered plans, we've changed plans, we're working differently. I don't want to spend a lot of time on how we're working differently, because I think we've probably all gone to enough webinars or read articles about how to Zoom better, or how to do a virtual event or something like that. But certainly some of those changes are relevant to what we're talking about tonight in terms of feasibility studies. So the good news, I think, is that feasibility studies really are still happening. There hasn't been a big change, a huge change in how they're done, certainly some nuances that I'll go over tonight. But organizations by and large did not take a full 2 years off. If they were in the planning mode, they might have slowed that a little bit. If they were in the middle of campaign, again, they had to alter things, but it's not as if people sort of shut the door and didn't do anything during COVID, which is the good news. And the consultants I spoke with, as well as colleagues around the area, really reported that after they got through 3/4 of the way through 21, then it really picked up. So as most of you probably have seen now, it's going, I hate to use the word normal on anything, right? But almost a normal clip. Mm-hmm. So that is what's going on with that. Other interesting things, I think that things that you'll find interesting is that, a lot of organizations, and this really depends on your particular organization, but some organizations have found that their case for fundraising got even stronger because of COVID. So, I mean, the obvious one would be a hospital, right? If you have a medical center, it enabled you to maybe frame your mission in a different way, or give strength to your mission or vision, or the people that were working there. Whereas maybe an arts organization, the arts organizations that I talked to, they had if they were a performance organization, right, they had a real lack of ability to perform. So donors did really respond, particularly to those kind of organizations, but those temporary bumps are starting to decline now. And they really were bumps that by and large organizations saw in annual fundraising. So it wasn't as if because of the circumstances of COVID, even if they were an organization that had a big service role in COVID, it wasn't as if they said, oh, let's launch a campaign around this and go for those big numbers. So they weren't seeing as many of the major gifts as you'd seen a campaign, although organizations did certainly report that people responded very well, whether they were using money to give to organizations they weren't using going out to dinner. I mean, that was certainly the case with some, or their hearts just opened, feeling that these people were giving good service. So they're definitely, it was not all bad news, I guess. There was some silver lining to it. But again, we're seeing some of that temporary bump go down now for sure. One change though, for organizations that were involved with feasibility studies during COVID at some time, certainly was the Zoom change, right? So everyone was doing less one-on-ones, and even if they were doing feasibility interviews, the majority of those were on Zoom. I think we've all learned to adapt to that a little better. To me, sort of pro and cons of Zoom when you're talking to prospects in a feasibility study are that the good news is it's a lot more efficient. When you're doing a feasibility study, and I worked as a consultant and done those, you can get through a lot more interviews in one day, and you can interview people from out of town and other things like that on Zoom. Hard part is that depending on who you're talking to, as you've all experienced, I'm sure, it can sometimes be hard to get that rapport. Sometimes your study participant is a little technologically challenged, so that can be a little bump. Also, I think something that we overlook is that when we're involved in feasibility studies or talking to any prospective donor, as skilled fundraisers, we pick up cues not only from their body language, but from the room. So whether you're at their home or in their business, and you're looking, as we all do, right, pictures on the wall or different things that you're picking up, sometimes it's seeing those things that let you enter another area of questioning or something like that, and you lose that on Zoom for sure. But we've adapted to that for sure. So let's continue to talk about feasibility studies. And again, this is an area where some of you have done feasibility studies even many times over. Others may be a little newer to it. So I'll try to cover both if I can. So we're talking about a feasibility study. What does that even mean? Like, what are the steps for that? So as I've said, we embark on feasibility studies or think about embarking on feasibility studies because the organization has some extraordinary need. You're starting a new program, you're putting up a new building. It could just be a look at the fact that you really need more endowment. I mean, we know that organizations have a lot of different needs, but it's that over and above what you're doing with your annual fund or other work that kind of drives you to that. So in that process, you're going to be developing the case for support, and a case for support is a written piece that talks about why you need what you need, basically. A good case for support, and I think this is sometimes really overlooked, a good case for support also gives you the opportunity to define or redefine your mission and values and really frame this project within that mission. So it's a wonderful piece not to just say we're raising money for this and this is how much it costs, but think about that piece as you're going into all of this as not just a leave behind piece for the people you're talking to, but just a communications piece for your organization, because it should also tell a lot about your organization. A little bit of history. So it's a really strong, solid piece and a big part of the feasibility study, because as you start to set appointments for who you're going to talk to in a feasibility study, you're going to take that case for support and you're going to send it ahead of time with the hopes, and I say hopes because it doesn't always happen, in the hope that that study participant is going to read it. A lot of organizations, when they make the appointment that we'll talk about in a minute, they link that electronically so that when that study participant looks at the calendar, it says, oh my gosh, I realized I'm going to talk to Rebecca in 2 days. Where did I put that? It's right there. So that's certainly a way to do it as well. So you've defined this need. You think that you have to do a campaign for this. You're going to put together some material to explain why you want to do this. And you're going to share this out with folks so that they can read it, and then you can talk to them about their reactions to this. That's sort of how the process goes. The most important part, I think, is who you talk to. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And it's worth spending a minute talking about this because I've seen and been involved with studies that maybe weren't as effective as they could be because we didn't talk to the right people. So just to be really candid, because we all work in different kind of organizations, there are many types of people, but for our conversation tonight, we'll talk about two groups of people. They're the people that you really want to talk to. They're your true major gift prospects, either qualified or strong suspects. But these are the people that you think have the potential to make the gifts to the campaign. And then there are the people in all of our orbits that are really important to the organization for other reasons. They could be influencers. They could be people that have just been around a long time. The challenge as staff that we have for those people is most of those people, if not all of those people, will assume they're going to be interviewed and want to be interviewed. They are all in, right? So those are the people that you don't have to twist their arm. And it could be people on your board that are not major givers to your board, but they're on your board for various reasons. And they're invested in this, which is great, but they all think that they should have time with a consultant. This is the balancing act. So you know that you need to involve these people somehow. But here's the trick. When we're talking to people, in order to, at the other end, really get good data about if we can make this goal and who's going to give, if we have those people in the mix completely and talk to them, they can skew your data. I mean, I'm just being really, really honest. So this I always call, this is my own term, ego versus efficiency. That's what I call it. So you got to balance those egos as what's efficient, because one, you want the data to be good, but two, as we go through this, feasibility studies that we'll talk about are not inexpensive endeavors, and you need to use the consultant's time if you're using an outside consultant really efficiently. So one practice that I've seen more often now, and I think is really a way to bump up your efficiency, is that some consultants will say, give me the list of your top prospects. Then give me the second set of people that we really need to talk to, but they're probably not going to give a major gift. What many consultants are doing now, and I've done it and I believe in it, is that they actually break those out separately. So in the process, when they go to churn the data that we'll talk about, so that those cheerleaders, but not big donors, don't skew your data, they actually pull them out and give you information about them separately. Does that make sense to folks? Because if you have, if you're interviewing 25 people and 10 of those are the cheerleaders, but not the givers, you're going to get, your information is going to be really off. So again, as you choose the people for the interviews, the other thing is, you know how we always used to talk about the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the people get 20%. You probably all know that in the last decade or so, it really is 90-10. So 90% of the people are going to give, most of your money.
Can I ask the question?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I don't want to take you off the track.
No.
So in the major gifts people category, do you interview only people that you believe are still going to make a major gift? Do you put people who have supported the organization in the past, but maybe have gotten sort of up to the top level of they're giving, but they're good, strong, faithful givers? So do you talk to people who have already made gifts to the institution or the organization, in addition to people that you think are going to be your prospects for this campaign?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's really important to have the people in the room on the staff side who have institutional knowledge and know that, along with the consultant, to make those decisions together.
Mhm.
So a good consultant will be talking to the staff members who are involved in this and going over those names.
Mhm.
So they'll look at a giving history. And so you need some of those people, particularly if they're influencers. And again, if they have made major gifts and you think that there's some potential, but you just don't want to have too many folks that you don't think will give an active gift. You need some of them, particularly if they have been giving for a long time, because we never forget that, you know, people that are our best prospects for planned gifts, right, are people that it's the longevity of their giving. So you have to have some of those dedicated people in there, particularly if part of your campaign will be planned giving. So you need some of those people. It's just, you really need to be aware that you can't have everybody. And some people look at that as maybe they just do, the consultant does a focus group with board members and then does some interviews individually with board members that have the bigger capacity, so that you're being able to talk to both. But you won't get good data on the other end if you're not talking to the highest percentage you can of that 90%, because you won't, when we start to talk about, you know, how you get that information, without those people in there, you're not going to get the numbers that you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's more nuanced than these are people that we're talking to because they're money people, past, present, or future. And these are the people who are just really know the organization. There's a middle
Yes.
to all of that.
Yes, yes. And I think that's why that's the real importance, is you have to have the right staff people in there, not just, and make sure you have people with some institutional knowledge that know that, as well as a consultant that has had that experience. So together you're making those choices once you have that list, for sure. The number of interviews, the best practice is still about the same. So if you're in a smaller or mid-sized campaign, you're probably going to be talking to, or the consultant's going to be talking to 25 to 40 people. That's usually the range of interviews. I would say here I see more in that small to mid campaign, 25 to 35. But if you're in a very large campaign, like, you know, U of R and other people have been in, those numbers, you know, can go out the window. It can be much larger if you're looking at a really large campaign. But for the campaigns that most people, I think, around here, and it's hard to range it because it really depends on, again, that prospect pool, right? So this is, if you're looking at the 90%, the people that are going to give you the best yes, and you're doing a percentage of that, how many people are those? For some organizations, that may be 40 people. For other people, if they have a really deep qualified prospect pool or donor pool, it could be more. But it really is about quality rather than quantity. Let's talk for a minute about cost of campaigns, because I'm asked that a lot, especially by organizations that haven't done them. Again, when I'm talking about more of the campaigns we see in this area, 25 to 35,000 is a pretty solid range when you start to think about it. Now, we're going to go in a minute and talk about a lot of things that can skew that. Certainly, you can go up to 50,000 pretty easily. And if you're in a large campaign, just for the feasibility study, you know, you can talk about a couple $100,000 depending on what you're doing. But again, if you're talking about a more standard 25 to 35 interviews, and again, we'll talk about things that can impact that, plan that you're going to be spending at least that somewhere between 25 and 35 or 25 to 30 range. It's pretty standard, I would say. But remember that you and your organization are the consumer. right? You get to drive this, and you can tailor this. Some consultants will come in, with sort of the prepackaged deal. But I always say, having been on both sides of this, like run campaigns and been a consultant, it's never just the prepackaged deal. You, judging by what your organization, the capability of your organization, you should tailor that, and that can change costs. So let's talk about some ways to do that, like real tactical ways. One certainly is the writing of the case statement. Are you going to write that internally, you or someone on your staff, or is the consulting firm going to write that? Most consulting firms have the capability to write that, or are aligned with people that can write that. But that's going to add to the cost, right? So if you and your team or someone on your staff honestly feel like you have the communications capability, or you're aligned with someone locally that you use for that stuff and trust and feel like they give you a good price to do that, that's a way to realign your costs. But again, you have to be really honest with yourselves, because the case statement is really important, and you can't, just because someone can write a good annual fund solicitation doesn't mean they can do a case statement. So you have to be honest with yourself about that. But if that's something that the consultant has in their, as part of what they're charging you, that may be a way, to look at it and take some things out. Other things that organizations sometimes don't think about: who's making the appointments? When I was a consultant and doing feasibility studies, I did it both ways. Sometimes the organization said, as the consultant, I want you to make the appointments. And we all make appointments with donors or donor prospects, and we know what that entails, right? So it's never one call, it's 2 or 3, and you're leaving messages and you're chasing people down, and then you have to align calendars. So the way all this works is you have so much time with the consultant, so you're trying to herd cats. You're trying to book people on the days that you're working with the consultant and juggling calendars. So it is a lot of back and forth to do that. Most consulting firms will do that for you, again, for a price. Personally, and this is just one person's opinion, I feel like a person on the staff should make the appointments, because people in your organization know these prospects best. Like, I am an unknown, to people in Rebecca's organization, but Rebecca talks to these donors every day, or someone on her staff does. It really depends. Sometimes it's even the executive assistant to the CEO. I mean, it can be different people for different organizations, but you know them best. So when you call Rebecca, they're going to pick up the phone, or they're going to return the call because they know you. So personally, I think as long as the consultant is very organized, so they give you a calendar, here are the days we can look at, here are the times, it's better to have someone internally make those appointments. You're going to need some guidelines and some coaching on it, because you need time for each appointment, you need travel time for the consultant to get around, all of that good stuff. So there's work to be done with it, but these are just things to think about when you're trying to think about the cost to the campaign. Another thing is the consultant out of town, or is the consultant local? If the consultant is out of town, then you need to think about costs that may be included in that cost, or maybe added on for airfare, for lodging. There's a lot of different costs with that. So talk to firms, both like local and regional and national. And again, that depends on your organization. If you're an affiliate, it may be that your national chapter, has people to recommend, but there's a lot of hidden costs in that. The other thing, there was a consultant that did a lot of work in the Rochester area. She was from New York City. And when I was on a local board, we were involved in a feasibility study, and the organization engaged her. I was stunned to find out when it came time for me to be interviewed in the study, I was stunned to find out that this particular consultant didn't drive. She didn't have a driver's license. She grew up in New York City. She still lived in New York City. She was a seasoned consultant and a very good consultant, but she didn't drive. And that actually did not come out in the selection process. So when she came to Rochester from New York City to do all the appointments, a staff member had to pick her up at the airport, and not only that, drive her to each appointment. Imagine the staff time, which really has to be worked into this for all of that. Now, she was a very good consultant, but that wasn't part of the pitch. So you really have to think about all those things if you're out of town versus in town, et cetera, lodging, travel, all that good stuff, tolls, gas. Go ahead.
What if a client thinks they can do something and they really can't do it? Like you had mentioned, they think they have the communications capabilities to write a good case statement, and
Right.
then you get it, and how do you handle a situation?
Sure. So that's the role where they've taken on writing the case statement, but you're the consultant, or you're on the board, or you're helping them somehow with it, and they're asking you for feedback? Or are you saying if you get the case statement and you're being interviewed? So is it a help or an interview?
Well, I'm wondering if they think they gave you a great product.
Yes. The best thing is honesty. So if it's early in the process and you're either consulting to them or helping them with this, or maybe you're a board member, so they're previewing it to you, it really does no one any good to sugarcoat it. Certainly, we're going to be very pleasant about it, but the best thing to do is say, this piece is informative, and I think it covers some of the bases, but for a feasibility study, for a campaign, I think it needs to cover more of the bases. And I think it would help us to have a broader perspective working with someone who has seen many of these. Because here's the thing about capital campaigns and feasibility studies. Even if you work for a long time in this field, you may only do 2 or 3 of these even over your career. So it's not like the annual fund or other things that even a seasoned professional does a lot. So you really want to work with people who are doing that all the time. That's what they do, because they'll catch a lot of nuances that you won't. So the best thing to do is be honest and say, this is good, solid information for our usual communications that we do with donors. But I really think for the feasibility study, we need to have someone that's doing that all the time and can better understand what we should showcase, what we should highlight in this, because they see that in a lot of other organizations. So yeah, and I've had feasibility study participants say to me, I love this organization, and I know that they're going to do this project. What they've written here doesn't really sell me. Like, I like what they're doing, but how this is written doesn't really sell me. And I always ask that as a consultant, like, how is the case study landing with you even before you get to the project? Like, what did you think of it? And they'll give you good feedback. Like, there should be a lot more pictures. I don't think they really made the case very strongly. They're assuming we know why they need this, and we don't. So yeah, that's sure. No problem. Another thing just to think of as you're potentially engaging a consultant is think about how many meetings you are going to need that consultant to have with your staff and the board. I have to tell you, I've seen more times than not that there's add-on costs, because when it comes time to actually present the study or talk about it, all of a sudden you're surprised, and it's like, oh, well, we need a meeting with this committee, this committee, this committee, the board, the advisory board, the auxiliary, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, the consultant's only coming once. Oh no, now they're coming for 3 days. So you have to think about those kind of things too, in terms of how many times you're going to need these people, not just to come for the interviews, but to do all that presentation of the actual study, because that's important too. We talked a little about the importance of who you talk to and that data. Here's sort of the secret sauce. I don't think it's very secret, but consultants, no matter who you talk to, and they all do it slightly differently, but really what they're doing and we get this question all the time, right? If they're only talking to 35 people, how do they know if we can make the goal? Well, again, if you're talking to the top tier of people and the people you expect to make the gifts, right? Then we can ascertain, if I think that Jared is gonna make $100,000 gift and he in the process that we'll talk about looks at the chart of gifts that I'm sharing with him during the interview in ranges, and he says, I think I'd probably be in this range, and he points to 10,000, then, right, we have some good data there. What consultants do is they use that chart of gifts, the range table, during the feasibility study interviews. And people really will, more people than you think will share a range if you pick the right people. Again, not a dollar amount, but a range. And what the consultant does is when they're churning that data, they look at it and they take the range, and in that calculation, they never pick the highest part of the range or the lowest part of the range. They pick right in the middle. And because if they're giving you high or low, they're either lowering your expectations or making you think you can raise more money than you do. So they're averaging it, unless someone is very specific about an actual dollar amount. And certainly with foundations and other things, there's a lot to put in there. But really, that's, again, one of the reasons why you have to have the right people in the room, because if you don't, what's there to average? That's sort of it. Now, yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I think you bring up really interesting points. So as a consultant, when you're working with an organization and you realize through that feasibility process that maybe the pyramid or the table isn't the right table for that organization, is there a process of going back and saying, we're not going to get this many major gifts, we're not going to get this many mid-level gifts, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean,
Or more than, I shouldn't be negative about it, or more than the expectation.
right, yeah, or more than exit. So that what that chart of gifts, and I don't know how many of you have worked, you may even work within your annual funds and other things with chart of gifts, but yeah, so when you look at that chart of gifts, and if you're not familiar with it, it's really talking about how many people you need at what level or what range in order to get to that number. I have to say, in all the campaigns I've done on either side, I don't want to say that it hasn't completely followed the chart of gifts, but there's always at the top nuances. So if you think at the top you need X many at the very, very top, but so there's, we'll just pick $100,000 gift you need as a lead gift at the top. You don't have 100,000, but you have 4 people that come in at 25. Have you accomplished that same thing, or are you just depleting that lower level? So exactly there, you have to be brutally honest. You and your staff have to be brutally honest about how many prospects you need and how many prospects you have. And I think that's really the big thing about feasibility studies, is that need and have are 2 very, very different things. In order to accomplish the goal of the campaign and raise that money and build that thing or do that, it's pretty easy to figure out how much money you need, right? Because you're going to your contractors or you're talking to your chairs, you're figuring out. The need is not the hard part. The need is there, and we all need more. Have you ever met an organization that didn't say, oh, well, if we go over, if we do more, we can do this and this and this? So you have that need. The really difficult part is you can make a chart of gifts. Anyone can make a chart of gifts that adds up to that. The thing is, get out a pencil, even at the most simplistic level, and start to actually write names down on that chart of gifts of not just people in your database, but qualified people in your database that can give it that level. I mean, you have to make it real enough to actually write those down, because it's fine. And I always use, big name examples of people because they usually don't touch people's organizations. And I once kidded Tom Golisano that I always use his name or Danny Wegman's whenever I was referring to people like that. When I got a gift from him and he said, I can't use my name anymore. But just because you send your magazine or someone like that attend your gala does not mean they're a qualified prospect. So you really have to be realistic that those are people, and qualified, we mean they know your organization. They like your organization. They've been giving to your organization. Maybe not at the level you want them to, but it is very rare to go from no gift to a major gift. It happens. But so you, in that chart of gifts, there's always people that move up and down in that chart, and don't stick to the fact like, well, we have to get the 100,000. We can't go for the 425s. That's fine, but you do have to be very realistic about that prospect base, because maybe you just don't have the depth of the prospects to be able to do that. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of different ratios out there for the number of prospects you need to generate a gift.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on sort of where it's at today? I typically see 3 to 4 to 1, but I was reading something the other day that was 7 to 1. You know, sort of stuck out to me as being.
Yeah, it's funny because I specifically asked that. Is it the 3 to 1? Is it the 5 to 1? 3 to 7 to 1 more, you know, the real difference is how realistic you are about how well you know that prospect. And, you know, the better you know the prospect, obviously, the more that goes down, but actually that number does hold. Yeah. So, does that answer your question about chart of gifts and people on the chart of gifts?
It does, and the one thing I'm hearing from you is if you can put names next to the levels, you'll be more successful.
Exactly. Real people that you know.
And don't worry if you're off the level, because having the name there is a campaign motivator.
Absolutely, absolutely. Something I want to touch on before assessments is, and you sort of touched on it a little bit, Rebecca, but what about using a consultant rather than using staff? So this is something that's often debated, particularly in small organizations. So once folks sometimes hear the cost of a consultant, they say, is this something we can do ourselves? I've talked to you a little bit about maybe pieces of it that can be done by staff to reduce costs. We've talked about that a little bit. But what about doing the whole thing? Best practice tells us that it's really better to use an outside person. I actually think that best practice still holds. In my experience, it still holds. And I thought that even when I wasn't a consultant, right? I mean, many consultants will tell you it's better because they can sell you services, right? But I wanted to talk a little bit about why it is better and what you should think about with your organization. Because what you don't want to be is penny wise and pound foolish, right? To save that money up front and not get a good study. So study participants are more honest with an outside person, not because they're embarrassed, but if they're in the study because, which is why they should be in the study, they know you well and they're close to the organization, right? That's why you're talking to them. They don't want to hurt your feelings. So it really isn't about the fact that they don't want to share their giving, because if they're a qualified prospect, you should have been having talk with them all along about their giving. You know, that's a more open conversation. It's not this big surprise. But they also, if they're your cheerleader, also don't want to hurt your feelings. So that's why some of the honesty comes out, particularly if they have some constructive criticism to give, they're more likely, you know, to give it to someone that isn't emotionally invested in it. One thing that organizations sometimes don't think about is if a staff member is doing the interview and they get to that chart of gifts, and once again, as I said, you should be talking about money. These aren't people that you never talk about money. But what people sometimes don't think about is the study participant can be a little confused whether they're just giving you input or it's a solicitation. Because if you're the person that has the relationship and you're soliciting them all the time, right, for their annual gifts, for special projects for other gifts. So they're used to Jared sitting there asking me for money. And now he's like, you know, where might you see yourself on this chart of gifts? Now, this is after you've talked about, this is at the end of the interview, right? So you've already talked about what they feel about the organization. Is the project good? You know, this is sort of the culminating thing. But if I'm used to seeing Jared in that role, there's a hesitancy like, am I making my gift commitment now? You know, it can confuse the conversation. And again, it's not embarrassment over talking about money so much as it can cause a little confusion, right? Did I just sign on the dotted line or not? Another thing that I found is that, you know, let's be straight about personalities. Some donors react better or worse to different people on the staff. If you're doing this internally, it's a double-edged sword. Are they, so is that donor prospect or study participant reacting to the case, or are they reacting to you? So think about a study and all the different people in your organization and who they have relationships with. Would it be feasible for me to match up donors with 10 different staff people because Melanie has the relationship with Jim and Jared has a relationship with Sue, and you see what I mean? So there's that dynamic in it as well of just relationships. But as I said before, where staff really can be effective is making the appointment, because that making the appointment is about opening doors, like we all say, which is really important. Okay, I wanted to switch gears a little with assessment, and hopefully as I talk, you'll see sort of why I'm talking about assessments as we're talking about feasibility studies. And a lot of this is really pertinent to COVID. A lot of things in this realm have changed because of COVID. So we already talked about the assessment, right? That's that sort of internal review or audit about if you're ready to do this. The reason that assessments are now becoming really important for a lot of organizations, even before they do a feasibility study, they're considering doing an assessment is because, and you can probably name them too, most people or many organizations, the staff hasn't been working together. They've been working remotely, they've been working at different locations. Maybe they've even been hired during COVID and never even met their coworkers. I mean, it's all over the board, right? And we know that going into a feasibility study and preparing for a campaign is, in a positive way, like going to war or a big sporting event, right? Everyone's on the team, you have to be at the top of your game. Is your staff after the last 2 years at the top of their game? Do they even know each other? Are they interacting with each other? If they're working remotely, which a lot of organizations tell people remotely, do you know how you divide the work? Can you divide that kind of work with people that are working remotely? I mean, it's just something you have to think about. If you've lost staff, are you in a position that you're staffed up enough to jump right into that feasibility study? Or do you really need to really do the even pre-step to the feasibility study to assess all of these things? And the relationship with the donors, which I think is pretty obvious, right? So it was much harder for all of us to keep those relationships going during COVID. So if those relationships have drifted, and according to the consulting firms that I talked to for this, they both have surveyed organizations about this, and they reported that 148, 150%, but call it 50% of organizations that they've talked to have said that there's been a definite drift from their donors the last 2 years. So half of the organizations have. So if this is the time where you've been least connected to your donors, are you ready to jump into feasibility mode, or do you actually sort of need a pre-step to that to sort of get it going? I think these are really important. And then one that I think is really key is your board as engaged as it was 2 years ago? Because I can tell you from my own personal experience, the boards that I sit on and the board that I manage at Allendale, the boards have been right in there, but they've been in a little survival mode. They're just like, let's keep it going, good, the annual fund's going, like our doors are open. I mean, depending on your organization, it's a lot. So they have been as far as you can imagine they've been from aspirational goals. They're hanging on, they're keeping it open, they're hoping about that, but they have not been in the place where they're like, this is when we think about the best things our organization could do. And for your board, right? The board has to be at the center of this, the first ones to give, the primary people to help you with asking. So is your board at that place? So if some of these aren't there, including your data, I know Melanie mentioned data. As fundraisers, we use trending data to predict a lot. What have your trends looked like for the last 2 years? Have they just gone nutso? Can you really base the giving that you've had in the last 2 or 3 years enough to bank on that as you start to go into campaign? You know, again, because of all the reasons that we know with COVID, have your patterns been disrupted? And do you feel like you need to stabilize that a little more before you go into it? All of these things I think are very, very COVID relevant, if you will, and things you have to think about. So are you ready for the feasibility study? Do you think you need to do an assessment before that? Sort of where are you at? I would never say if there's a need, you know, don't embark on this, but I think there's a lot of different things, newer things even, that you have to consider before that, just to make sure you're all going into it with eyes wide open, whatever that is, because of what we've experienced. So I'd love to have some other questions. I know I threw a lot of information at you because it's not only a big topic, but an even bigger topic now. So questions or thoughts or?
I'll start. I have a question.
Go ahead.
So in the campaign that we're looking to embark on, it'd probably be, and I know we're in a circle of friends here,
Sure.
probably be maybe a $25 million campaign. I won't get too much into detail, but the impact of what we are going to quote unquote build, not only literally, but figuratively,
Sure.
would have a national impact. So as I'm looking at and have had experience working with local versus national consultant, I'm trying to do some research. Is there someone, so my organization is in the IDD space. So has there been someone who has a national large consultant that has worked in that space? So I guess that's what I'm kind of tinkering with. Do we look at a local consultant that really knows the local community versus going after a national consultant? Because I believe we have the opportunity to engage donors and foundations, corporations way outside the Rochester area.
Right. So that's the opportunity, could be national, but right now your core base is local. Is that right?
Yes, our core base is local, yes.
Okay. So I think you pick the consultant based on their ability to conduct the kind of campaign that you want and that you can relate to. So bluntly put, you're going to spend a lot of time with these consultants. You have to make sure that you're on the same page with the consultant, whether they're local or national, doesn't matter, but are you on the same page with them? Do you think the same way? But it really is about the consultant that's done the best work in your space. I mean, there are consultants I would start to, I'm sure you have peers, you know, in other states or other places, start to call those peers and say, if you've done a campaign in the last 2 or 3 years, who did you use? Because when you have that kind of nuance, it sounds like you want a consultant that's very, very strong in your space. And we all know like higher ed has certain consultants that they use, Catholic schools has certain consultants they use, you know, there definitely are niches. So I would say that start there and find out if there are any local or regional consultants. A great thing we have going for us is, although it's at the far part of the state, right? There's a lot of consulting firms in New York that do national. And they're not so far away that maybe they're cost prohibitive and maybe they're doing your kind of work. So I would say that's the most important. The other thing, depending on the size of the campaign and what you're doing, is you may want to sort of use both. You may look at that and say, We want to use a local firm for this, but we want a national firm. And again, you have to look at the cost of that. Maybe the national firm isn't doing a full feasibility study, but maybe they're talking to a couple select prospects. Almost, if any of you have ever used anyone to do prospect research for you. So if you don't have a prospect research department, you call an individual that does good prospect research. We used to have a couple here that we knew, wonderful, wonderful people, Elaine, one of our older members. And you have them just talk to a couple of those national foundations of prospects. So you could do both, but I think the most important thing is to get the best consultant in your space.
So what was funny is I did a little bit of research and I found one like, this is someone in New Jersey, it was a $10 million building. I'm like, perfect. So I reached out, she got back to me. Oh, we didn't use a consultant. We just hired a campaign director in-house. I'm like, no, is that what I need? Like, wow. And they did, they raised $10 million in a couple of years to build this building. So maybe I need to hire whoever that campaign manager was.
I was gonna say, you know, I mean, and some organizations do bring in just the campaign consultant. But again, that's something to look at to say, is that person going to be in residence? Are they a staff member? Are they a staff member only for the duration of the campaign? You know, that's definitely a whole other look. But I mean, you could do a hybrid.
Yeah, but you're right. I think having someone who knows the space and knows the different organizations, people, foundations that support IDD, that's, I think, going to tip over, well, have they ran a national large campaign versus a smaller one. So something like that.
I'll just make a comment on what you said, because maybe you'll have additional thoughts about this. We found a national consultant who had success at a local campaign here. So he already knew, and his company already knew the environment. We knew that he had raised $15 million, and so it was within the scope of what we were trying to do.
Yep.
And again, I've been at this for a long time, but I've only been involved in 2 feasibility studies.
Right.
So I knew that I don't know what I'm doing.
Right. You know enough to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly, Lydia.
So you use a term where you said that you need to be on the same page as the consultant and the client. And I thought maybe it was just me, but Melanie said it when she came in, that she's worked at more than one location where you come in and you're seeing the feasibility study that was done for the campaign, and the organization has said, oh no, we're way past that. We're gonna raise way more than that, and these people are gonna be giving this money, and we know, like, they know something that nobody else knows, right? How do you define that?
Sure.
Being on the same page?
Thank you for asking that. What I mean by same page is that you both, it has nothing to do with, it's all about relationships. Do you think the same way? Do you have the same values? Do you have the same mission? Are they people that you can work with? Are they people with integrity? That's really the key. Are you on the same page that way? But thank you for bringing up that point, because I neglected to add, in terms of choosing a consultant, that huge red flag. Never go with an organization that comes in already giving you the answer before they've done the work. That is a scary thing, and I've seen it happen. And again, and I say this not to diss any consultants, and I did consulting for 8 years, but the organization has to have an open mind, and you have to have an open mind. And one of the questions I always encourage organizations to ask as they're interviewing consultants is, have you ever told an organization not to do a campaign, and what was that experience? I can tell you, when I was talking to the 2 consulting firms, and then we just kind of got into consulting talk, but I had 2 clients, among many clients I did feasibility studies for. I had 2 local organizations that I got through the study, and I said to them, you can't do this. And one of them, it was a really interesting process, because I told them, obviously I met with the staff and the board and everything. I would never surprise anyone with that news. You always meet with the staff ahead of time. But I told them, and the very first thing the board chair said to me is, why are you telling me this? Because if you tell us we can do the campaign, we would automatically hire you. And I said, because I would not be honest, because you can't do this campaign. It is the hardest thing to tell an organization you can't do a campaign. But it was the best thing. And 3 years later, they said to me, you were absolutely right. We couldn't have done that. And they chunked off one project within the campaign and decided to do it and then finish that. But they didn't do the other. So I never mean on the same page as in, we have to raise this money and you're telling us we can. It's more the philosophical, do you feel like these people have integrity? Do they match your mission and your vision?
So it's not a breach of alignment or, use the F word, a failure. If the consultant comes back and says, we've done your complete feasibility study and based on this data and this data and this information that you provided to us, we're telling you that you can successfully raise $150 million over the next 6 years of your campaign. And the president of the organization and the board chair says, but we have to raise $700 million. So that's what we're going to raise. And we're going to go forward with this campaign, even though the consultant told us 150 million.
Oh, I've seen it happen. I've been in the room when it happened. It is deadly. And it's again, if that's what the feasibility is stunning you, that's the really difficult part. I mean, I'll be really honest with you. I was the staff person sitting there and that happened to me.
Yeah.
And I said, we have to go with what they said. And I tried to appease. And what I did was broke the project up and said, what if we do this part of the project that's 150 million, we chunk it off, and then we go through and see. They were right. I mean, we raised about 150 million, just like they said we were going to. We never would have gotten to the other. But I'll be honest with you, it takes really brave staff people and hopefully people on your board to say, can we look at this a different way? Maybe we can never get there, but we can't get there now. But what part of this can we do? Was there any part of the case statement that resonated enough that we can support that? But the very worst thing is that scenario. And unfortunately, it does happen.
Yeah.
And this was hard, like, well, why did I bother? Like, take it and throw it out. Why did I bother doing this?
Why would you expend the money that you do on a feasibility campaign and then ignore what the consultant told you?
Because you really, really want to build this thing or do this thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be told no, because organizations can take that personally. Like, are you saying that our mission isn't worthy? Or are you saying this isn't worthy? And so hopefully you have a good consultant that delivers that to say, that's absolutely not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But
Well, and that's where that same page goes, because I have seen, not in grand numbers, but spaces where executive level people within an organization just assume that the consultant is lowballing. Of course, they're going to tell us, this much because they want us to be able to, go over that, so we could really be here, and they think that it's this, it's
And
not,
again,
it's not an
that's-
honest relationship. between
right,
the
and
consultant
that's why, and I
the-
know that we're at our time, though, so I'll conclude by saying, again, that's as you do your due diligence and you pick a consulting firm, don't just talk to the references that they give you. See if you can, see if you can look around to get other ones, but even if you're calling their references, always say, what did your feasibility study say you could raise and what did you raise with these consultants?
Mine says, Teresa Newmark, but why spend the money on the feasibility study if you already know the answer? The other way to look at it.
True, right. And the thing is, until you do the feasibility study, you may think you know the answer, but I'm sure you don't, because you haven't had that discussion. So the board or whatever in this scenario thinks they know the answer. They really don't know the answer. So it's always worth doing that investigation. Always worth it. It's, again, that's where hopefully the advancement team has the relationship with the board and the rest of the executive team to understand why you're doing this, and that you need to be able to look at those results honestly. And it's not a criticism against your personality or character if you can't raise that money. Anything else? Great. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. It's great to see faces again. And please, my AFP has my information. Please feel free to reach out to me over at Allendale by email or cell phone, or I can give that to you. I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
Great. I
Thank
feel like
you.
we should do the Zoom.
Yeah.
Oh.
Or the real applause.
Yes, well, thank you all very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot about, what was her name, Jane?